Recently, a colleague asked a group of Jewish educators in an online conversation, what is the question that Yom Kippur is the answer to? And there were various responses, mostly around the idea of, what are we doing here, people? What am I doing here? What are we collectively doing here? Or in the more poetic way of saying it, in the words of Mary Oliver, what are you doing with your one wild and precious life? As I thought about the question and the discussion, what struck me that I was more interested in is how. How are we supposed to figure out the answer to that? Or answers? How did our ancients and the generations since, who gifted us with texts and rituals and traditions, how did they want us to approach these questions? Because clearly everyone in every tradition tries to ask that. So what were our specific tradition urging us to do in these high holy days? And there are several offerings. In fact, there are many offerings to try and figure out this question of what are we doing? What am I doing with my life? What are we collectively doing as a community, as a society? One of the primary offerings, and there are many, many, but one of the primary offerings that I want to invite you to think about tonight and all day tomorrow if you open into this focus, this practice, is Yom Kippur as a death meditation. On Yom Kippur, our sages draw us near to the reality of our mortality, to our death, in order to connect us more deeply, fully, and honestly with life and our living. On Yom Kippur, they urge us to repair harm and to do good, and to do this together. Yom Kippur tells us, you are going to die, repair harm, do good, do it together. There are several ways that Yom Kippur draws us near to the reality of our mortality. We do the Vidui confessional prayer that we just did on Yom Kippur, and we do the Vidui just before we die. These are times for reflecting and owning up to what we have done that we need to repair before we die, before we enter a new year. We connect with the vulnerability of our bodies through fasting. We do a Yizkor service to connect with our dead. And there's also a tradition that many of us are doing tonight of wearing white on Yom Kippur. There are, of course, because we're Jewish, several reasons why we wear white. But one of them is to connect with the white shroud that we will be wrapped in when we die. And we recite the Unatana Tokef prayer, a liturgical poem attributed to Rabbi Amnon of Mainz in the 11th century. This poem that has taken on such incredible significance. This Unatana Tokef poem says, who shall live and who shall die? It calls out the reality of our mortality. Unatana Tokef Kirshat Hayom, Ki hu noya vayom. Let us declare the holy power of this day. It is awe-filled with yirah and mighty. The prayer describes the spiritual metaphor of this book of life. And it says in this year, who shall live and who shall die? Mi yichye o mi yamut, who by fire and who by water? Mi va'esh o mi v'mayim. Our origins, it tells us, are dust. Adam yisodom me'afar, and our end is dust. We draw close to the reality of death on Yom Kippur to clarify our lives, to clarify what is most important. What are we doing here? We get close to death to clarify all of us collectively, our collective lives as a society, as a planet. What is important and necessary, and what is not important or good or necessary. There are no pockets in the burial shroud that we are wrapped in. Nothing material to bring with you. Except in some traditions, spoons that are placed in the coffin, but that's a story for another day. For some of you here tonight, you're already inside of this place of death contemplation. Not by your own choosing. It's a sacred part of my role as a rabbi to be with you, you who are walking through this terrain. You for who will live and who will die is a daily presence, not a poetic once-a-year reminder. Just in these last couple months, you've shared with me that your bone marrow is changing quickly in an alarming direction. You're dealing with unfathomable violence and death in your extended family. You're in the middle of treatment for a malignant tumor. Your beloved is dealing with metastasis of cancer all over their body. Your parent is dealing with metastasis of cancer all over their body. You found yourself lying on a street corner in the midst of a heart attack. You sat with a beloved sister as they died from an accidental overdose, and then right after, another dear friend did the same. You are struggling to live after the death of your child. It is a daily refrain for you right now, sometimes hourly. Who will live and who will die? For all of you in this everyday death contemplation, welcome to Kol Nidre. Welcome to Yom Kippur. For the next 25 hours, you can bring it here, and you don't have to dodge or deflect or pretend or make small talk that you do not want to make. The community joins you here tonight. We are not all in this place. But tonight you can bring it here, and the community as a whole joins you. If you are in this place, I invite you now to take a breath and to focus on the exhale. Breathing in, and let it be a long exhale. Yom Kippur offers you the opportunity of an exhale. Everyone else, I want you to listen for the exhales around you. And as you hear one or as you feel moved to, I want you to inhale. Draw in the air as they give it out, and then exhale back. Giving and taking in our breath tonight in the reality of our mortality and of our sharing of this reality on Yom Kippur. Drawing near to the reality of our mortality, to the possibility of death, is part of the profound offering of sacred traditions. In the Mishnah, we learn that Rabbi Eliezer says, repent, do tshuva one day before your death. Of course, Rabbi Eliezer's students asked him, but how does a person know the day of their death? He says essentially, good point. All the more so, one should do tshuva every day, lest he die tomorrow. We can draw near, listen, and learn about our lives from the reality of our mortality. And the willingness to do so opens into the possibility of awe, and wonder, the awe and wonder of life and of living. There is so much pressure in our prevailing culture to deny death and its reality. Barbara Ehrenreich, of blessed memory, Zichrona Livracha, my dear friend Ben's mother. In her book, Natural Causes, she talks about the money, the big business, the big money being made in healthcare industries and in the wellness industry to deny death. And in the process, to also deny the reality of aging. Yes to aging. To the beauty and wonder and challenge of aging, and to recognize the privilege of aging, which those who are walking in the reality of death know is a privilege. Barbara Ehrenreich shares how her early life as a science researcher, her feminism, her clarity of the medical system's role in the takeover of birth from women and women's health, and her cancer experience, and again the medical industry and cultures taking over, she reclaims a different view of her living and her dying. She says, you can think of death bitterly or with resignation as a tragic interruption of your life and take every possible means to postpone it. Or more realistically, you could think of life as an interruption of an eternity of non-existence and seize it as a brief opportunity to observe and interact with the living, ever-surprising world around us. A couple weeks ago at a Nefesh Shabbat, Ethne, who's I think doing childcare right now, came bounding in from a summer away at summer camp counseling. They were a counselor at summer camp, and came in and gave me a big hug and said, Rabbi Susan, how was your summer? And I paused, sort of confused, not sure how to answer, and I said, it was a whirlwind, a roller coaster, an exhausting trial, a cluster flower. All the metaphors. It was all of the metaphors. It was a shaking spiritual journey this summer for my beloved, my family, one we had not signed up for and did not want, and yet here it was. A meditation on mortality, on family, on love, on fear, and on, again, not knowing. My husband had been dealing with an ongoing pain that was getting worse. He had an MRI 3 years ago, and his doctor saw a little something and thought the little something was not a concern. He did physical therapy and acupuncture and more physical therapy and all the things people were recommending. And at the beginning of this summer, an MRI showed that the little something had become a bigger something, a potentially scary something, and he was referred to an oncologist. An oncologist? No. No. Not enough no's that I can say. We had done this before. I went through an intense cancer journey 5 summers ago, and this summer was the marking of the end of the scanning and the scoping and the lifting off of this family. Please, not for my beloved, not cancer again, for our family. Not for him, not for my kids. There was a strange calm and a wild humor that found us laughing at things that were really not funny. Kind of freaked out the doctors, but it was helpful. It ended up being a long 9 weeks of unknowing at every turn, opening to more unknown. The tests and the procedures that were supposed to, that usually bring some sort of clarity, in this case open yet to more unknown. I thought to myself, careful what you preach and teach. Don't they say that to rabbis and pastors? Because, as many of you know, navigating the unknown, helping to navigate the unknown is at the center of my rabbiing. And here we were in the depth of incredible uncertainty, living each day in a hyper-presence that can come in these times that bring with it such tender beauty and deep joy and also real fear an unexplained growth. Must be some form of cancer, they said, but we're not sure what. 2 surgeries to find out. The pathologist said it was a rare sarcoma cancer, and the appointments were set for the beginning of treatment. But he knew enough to ask another pathologist in another part of the country for a different opinion. And 2 weeks later, the evening before the treatment started, the pathologist across the country said, wait, no, don't do that. It's not a sarcoma. It's a rare hemangioma, non-cancerous tumor. What? And they said, we're not sure. Another surgery to remove suspicious-looking lymph nodes, and more pathologists in different parts of the country weighed in, waiting and waiting week after week inside the unknown. What are we preparing for here? What does this mean here? What does it mean next? What does it mean for our oldest kid who's either going to college or telling us he's not going to college if there's going to be treatment? Being thrown into this place without a choice can be so overwhelming. The reality of the unknown brings many things. And one part is the bringing of the reality of our mortality to now stare at you. Often what we need is time actually to not think about it. To please give me a break from it, from its constant stare. And even though I know that feeling intimately, I also know that it's staring at you is not the same as the choice to consciously be with it. Though the experience is different, both for the exhalers and the inhalers amongst us tonight, those walking through this terrain right now and those who don't yet walk in this reality, we can come together in this night in the possibility of being with death in a contained vessel of time. Not all the time, in a contained vessel of time. In this day of Yom Kippur, it is part of what our ancients gift us in telling us that there's so much insight and transformation to be offered in this place, but it is not every day all the time, and it's also not never. It is doing so intentionally in contained vessels of time, and we are in one right now. In Yom Kippur. Tonight, I want to offer to you the possibility of choosing to come gently into the reality of your mortality, to sit together with it, on it, in it, any of the directions, welcoming a conversation with mortality for all of us. Our people have creatively imagined the presence of death as the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. It shows up in our folklore and our traditions, a being with eyes all over its body, watching and watching. And mostly a wanderer, a beggar, a fugitive, a nomad who can be tricked hilariously, who can be assuaged with good deeds and deeply compassionate acts and fervent prayers, and who can be, of course, danced with in the dance of death that would happen at joyful times like weddings and Purim meals. I want to welcome you now to see death, to allow the reality of mortality to enter this big room. Maybe it has a color. Maybe it has a shade of light. Maybe it's an embodied figure, perhaps an ancestor, someone who has died, who is entering in now. You can leave your eyes open to see it or closed. What might death want to tell you? Greet it. Offer a greeting to the presence of death. Let it know that you want to hear it and you're willing to listen to what it wants to tell you about living and about dying, about who you are, about who you want to be, about what you do in your life and what you don't do, what you can do less of, what you can do more of. Maybe you're holding a question in your life about some aspect of your life, and you can hold this question up to the light of mortality, to the light of death, and what does it want to tell you? Does the rabbi know that what she's asking us to do is very scary? Yes, the rabbi does know that. It is very scary. Can be. That's why we do it in contained vessels of time. And remember, there's fear and there's fear. As we learn about, and when we've learned about yirah and about courage, about ometz lev, there's pachad, fear. The fear of flight, fight, freeze, freak out, all the F's. You know, there's always more F's in that. The closing fear of pachad, or the opening possibility of the fear, that sacred fear, that's yirah, that's awe, that's wonder. That is the kind of fear that being with the reality of mortality can bring us. It is through this expansive fear, this state of awe, or in the words of Rabbi Heschel, this radical amazement when we draw near to death. It's part of how we answer the question, what are we doing here, people? What are we doing here, people? And what are we doing here? If we go back into the Unatana Tokef prayer that puts out this who will live and who will die, it aligns us with who we are and who we want to be, and it goes on to say there are things we can do with the reality of our death. The end of the prayer, it declares tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. They will help us with this reality. Tshuva, repair harm, like Rabbi Eliezer said, repair harm, heal hurts and mistakes and painful ruptures. Tefillah, pray, connect inward, listen. Tzedakah, bring justice and generosity to those who are most vulnerable. Basically, do good. Be a good person, do good. There are so many ways to do that. Each of these things, tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, there's lists and lists and lists. I bet you can make your own lists and lists and lists. You know what these things are. They're clear. They're everywhere around you in our personal lives, in our collective lives. We draw near to the reality of our death, and it points us in a straight shot to what are we doing here, and with some urgency to do it. Yom Kippur tells us, remember death, do good, do it together, and do it now. Tonight, you're sitting partially in this reality, all of us together here in this Nefesh community. This community was born from many forces, and one of them was this journey I took in the reality of mortality. And the clarity it brought me and the urgency in time to do it. The reality of death brings new time zones, things that we can slow down and let go of, and things we must do now and with urgency. My husband said to me this summer inside of this crazy odyssey, which thank God it was, the guy who said it wasn't cancerous was right, and the tumor is gone. He said to me this summer, seeing what happened to you and to others who you are rabbiing for, I'm a little freaked out about what's about to happen to my life in a good way. That year I freaked out. We invite it in now as we begin Yom Kippur, the reality of our mortality, and we will be with it through Ne'ilah. And then as the sun goes down, we will release it. It has a beginning and an ending, our being with the reality of mortality, whether that's a daily practice or a weekly or a monthly or a yearly practice. We will let it go. But now we are very much inside of it. I wanted to end by sharing with you that yes, there is the idea also of spiritual death. And I left it for the end so I am abundantly clear that what I am speaking about is actual mortality. Actual mortality, not just spiritual death. But when we open to the reality of our mortality, then we see the possibility and the transformation also of spiritual death. This summer, I was sitting with someone in our community whose long-term relationship is ending, and as parts of herself, it's ending because parts of herself are no longer what she thought them to be. And it's scary and overwhelming and filled with doubt. And she said to me, I am afraid that I am dying. And I looked at her after hearing all of the ways that she is transforming. And I said, yes, you are dying. There is dying that is happening. And I will hold for you the possibility in that dying. Our ancients want us to not run from the reality of our mortality, from time to be with it and its profound teachings, and to let it speak into our lives, into who we are and who we want to be. We are all going to die. Let's do some good, let's do it together, and let's do it now. Mary Oliver, Zichrona Livracha, who brought us in, will bring us out. In her poem, Have You Ever Tried to Enter the Long Black Branches? Who can open the door who does not reach for the latch? Who can travel the miles who does not put one foot in front of the other, all attentive to what presents itself continually? Who will behold the inner chamber, who has not observed with admiration, even with rapture, the outer stone? Well, there is time left. Fields everywhere invite you into them. And who will care? Who will chide you if you wander away from wherever you are to look for your soul? Quickly then, get up. Put on your coat, leave your desk, to put one foot in front of the door of the grass, which is the mystery, which is death as well as life, and not be afraid. To set one's foot in the door of death and be overcome with amazement. Listen, are you breathing just a little and calling it a life, while the soul, after all, is only a window, and the opening of the window no more difficult than the wakening from a little sleep? Shana Tova.